My name is Katherine, and I'm 32 years old. When I was 12, my parents abandoned me at a crowded Chicago train station as a joke. They drove away laughing, saying, "Let's see how she finds her way home." The terror I felt watching their backs disappear into that sea of strangers changed me forever. After years of their cruel pranks, this was the final straw. I eventually escaped to build my own life, and I never went back. Before I tell you how a childhood joke changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch. I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Four-bedroom house with a neatly trimmed lawn, family vacations every summer, parents who attended all school functions. My father, Tom, worked as an insurance executive, always dressed in crisp button-down shirts, while my mother, Diane, ran a successful local boutique. They drove nice cars, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and seemed to have it all together. Behind closed doors, the reality was starkly different. Their relationship was deeply dysfunctional, marked by constant arguments that would suddenly transform into eerie silence for days. They rarely showed physical affection toward each other, instead, expressing their frustration through passive-aggressive jabs and calculated mind games. Unfortunately, I became the primary target for their dysfunction from a very young age. What they called jokes and pranks were actually forms of emotional abuse that left invisible scars. I can still remember being 5 years old, frantically searching for my beloved stuffed rabbit, Hoppy, tears streaming down my face, while my parents watched with barely concealed amusement. After hours of my desperate searching, they finally pulled him from their hiding place, laughing at how upset I had become. "It was just a joke, Catherine," my mother would say. "You're too sensitive." This pattern repeated throughout my childhood. They would tell me school was canceled due to snow, then laugh when I missed the bus and had to be driven in, arriving late and humiliated. They would forget me at department stores, the grocery store, or the mall, walking out to the car and driving around the block while I panicked, convinced I had been abandoned. Each time they would return with the same explanation. "We were just joking. You should have seen your face." My younger brother Michael was treated entirely differently. 3 years younger than me, he was the golden child who could do no wrong. Where I received criticism, he received praise. Where my achievements were minimized, his were celebrated. My parents never played their cruel jokes on him. He was protected in a way I never was. As the family scapegoat, I was blamed for everything that went wrong. If my father had a bad day at work somehow, it was because I had been too noisy the night before and he couldn't sleep well. If my mother was in a foul mood, it was because I hadn't properly appreciated the dinner she had made. I learned to walk on eggshells to make myself small and unobtrusive, trying desperately to avoid becoming the target of their unpredictable cruelty. The constant state of anxiety affected every aspect of my childhood development. I became withdrawn, finding safety in solitude. Books became my refuge, fictional worlds where adults were kind and children were protected. School became my sanctuary, and I threw myself into academics with singular focus. If I couldn't earn my parents' love, I reasoned I could at least make them proud through achievements they could brag about to their friends. The only adult who showed me consistent love was my grandmother Martha, my mother's mother. She lived an hour away, and visits to her small, cozy home were the only times I felt truly safe. She baked cookies with me, taught me to knit, and most importantly, listened when I talked. She never dismissed my feelings or made me feel like I was overreacting. "You have a gentle heart, Catherine," she would tell me, tucking my hair behind my ear. "That's not a weakness, it's a strength." At school, I found some escape through friendships, particularly with my best friend Lizzie Johnson. Smart and perceptive, Lizzie noticed things about my home life that other kids missed. She saw how I flinched at loud noises, how I apologized constantly, how I never invited friends over. "Your parents are weird," she declared one day as we sat on the swings during recess. "They don't talk to you like my parents talk to me." I didn't know how to explain that she was right, that there was something wrong with my family because I had been conditioned to believe that I was the problem. In sixth grade, my teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed my flinching behavior when she raised her voice to quiet the class. She kept me after school one day asking gentle questions about my home life. I was terrified to say anything negative about my parents, knowing it would only make things worse. But something in her kind eyes made me slip up. Sometimes they think it's funny when I'm scared, I admitted in a whisper. The look of concern on her face made me immediately backtrack, insisting everything was fine. A week later, my parents were called in for a conference. I sat outside the classroom, stomach churning with dread, knowing that whatever happened in that room would be blamed on me later. When they emerged, however, they were all smiles. Ms. Rodriguez looked confused, but somewhat reassured. In the car, my mother turned to me with a cold smile. "Nice try," she said quietly. "Next time, think before you make up stories about us." That was when I learned about my parents' most dangerous ability, their charm. They could convince anyone they were loving, concerned parents. My father's hearty laugh and firm handshake, my mother's warm smile and community involvement. These were masks they wore perfectly in public. No one saw what happened at home, and no one would believe me if I told them. But the train station incident would change everything. My 12th birthday fell on a Saturday in October. The evening before my parents announced a surprise, we would be spending the day in downtown Chicago. "We'll visit the Art Institute, have lunch at that pizza place you like, and maybe do some shopping," my mother said, uncharacteristically enthusiastic. My father added, "It'll be a day just for you, kiddo." I couldn't believe my luck. A whole day centered around what I wanted to do. It seemed too good to be true, and it was. But at 12 years old, despite years of evidence to the contrary, I still desperately wanted to believe my parents could change, that they might finally see me as worthy of their genuine affection. The morning started well enough. We took the early commuter train into the city, my parents unusually attentive, asking about what exhibits I wanted to see at the museum. Michael was staying with a friend, so it was just the three of us. For a brief, shining moment, I felt special, chosen, loved. The cracks in the facade began to show during our museum visit. My father grew impatient as I lingered over Impressionist paintings, checking his watch and sighing loudly. My mother's comments became increasingly critical of my clothes, my hair, the way I walked. By lunchtime, the familiar knot of anxiety had returned to my stomach. The deep dish pizza I had been looking forward to tasted like cardboard as I tried to make myself smaller, less annoying, less me. After lunch, my mother suggested we head to Union Station. "We can catch an earlier train home," she said, exchanging a look with my father that I couldn't interpret but recognized as troubling. "But first, let's look at the Great Hall. It's beautiful, and Katherine hasn't seen it." Union Station was overwhelming. The massive Beaux-Arts building was crowded with weekend travelers, the cavernous Great Hall echoing with announcements and conversations. I stayed close to my parents, intimidated by the press of strangers, the vastness of the space, the confusing layout of platforms and waiting areas. "Wait here by this pillar," my father instructed, pointing to one of the massive columns that lined the hall. "Mom and I need to check the train schedule and get our tickets. We'll be right back." "Can I come with you?" I asked, a flutter of anxiety already rising in my chest. "No, just stay put," my mother said sharply. "We won't be long. Count the tiles on the floor or something." I watched them walk away, my father's arm around my mother's waist, their heads bent together in conversation. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The initial anxiety blossomed into full-blown panic. Had I misunderstood? Had they said to meet them somewhere else? Had there been an emergency? After 30 minutes, I couldn't stand still any longer. I began searching the station, trying to find the ticket counters, checking the cafes and shops, even peering down the long corridors that led to the train platforms. The station was labyrinthine, and my panic made it impossible to think clearly. Every announcement over the loudspeaker made me jump. Every passing stranger became a potential threat or rescuer. An hour into my desperate search, tears streaming down my face, I bumped into an elderly woman who noticed my distress. "Are you lost, dear?" she asked, her face creased with concern. "I can't find my parents," I sobbed beyond embarrassment or caution. "They said they were getting tickets, but they didn't come back." The woman who introduced herself as Ruth led me gently to the station security office. "This young lady can't find her parents," she explained to the guard at the desk. "They've been missing for over an hour." The security guard, a kind-faced man whose nameplate read, "Jake took down my information. My full name, my parents' names, our address and phone number." "Sometimes people get lost in the crowd," he reassured me. "We'll make an announcement and find them." As Jake was about to use the PA system, a familiar voice rang out. "Katherine, there you are." My parents strode into the security office looking annoyed rather than relieved. There was no hint of worry on their faces, no sign that they had been frantically searching for their missing child. "We told you to stay by the pillar," my father said sternly. "Why did you wander off?" "I waited for over an hour," I said, my voice small. "You didn't come back." My mother laughed an artificial sound that didn't reach her eyes. "It was hardly an hour, maybe 20 minutes at most. You always exaggerate." Jake looked between us, confusion evident on his face. "You left your daughter alone in the station." My mother turned her charm on full force. "We were just at the ticket counter. She was supposed to wait by the column. Kids this age, they get distracted, wander off. We've been looking everywhere for her." "I didn't wander off," I protested weakly. "I waited and waited." My father placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing just slightly too hard. "She has an active imagination," he told Jake with a conspiratorial smile. "Always has." "We're sorry for the trouble." Jake didn't look entirely convinced, but my parents were masters of this performance. "Perhaps next time, sir, you should take your daughter with you, rather than leaving her alone in a busy station," he suggested firmly. "Even for a few minutes, all sorts of people pass through here." "Absolutely," my father agreed readily. Lesson learned. The car ride home was silent except for my occasional sniffles as I tried to stop crying. Neither of my parents spoke to me directly until we were almost home. "You really embarrassed us today, Katherine," my mother finally said. "Making a scene like that involving station security. It was completely unnecessary." "We were just playing a little joke," my father added. "Teaching you to be more independent. You need to toughen up." That night, as I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, I heard them talking in the kitchen below my room. "Did you see how terrified she looked, Priceless?" My father's laugh was unmistakable. "She was so red and snotty by the time we found her," my mother added. "She always was too sensitive. Remember when we hit her rabbit same reaction? Maybe now she'll learn not to be such a baby." As I listened to them laugh about my terror, something hardened inside me. A resolve took shape, crystallizing from the pain and betrayal. I made a promise to myself that night I would find a way out, and once I escaped, I would never come back. The train station incident marked a turning point in my life. On the outside, I may have looked like the same 12-year-old girl, but inside, everything had changed. I had seen my parents for who they truly were, people who derived pleasure from my pain, and I could never unsee it. I became strategic, recognizing that my escape would require careful planning and patience. I started a secret journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard under my bed, where I documented their patterns and weaknesses. I noted which behaviors earned their approval and which triggered their cruelty. I tracked the locations of important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, that I would eventually need to take with me. My relationship with my grandmother Martha began to deteriorate around this time, not due to any conflict between us, but because her health was failing. Visits became less frequent as she moved into assisted living, and her once sharp mind began to cloud with dementia. During my increasingly rare visits, she would sometimes mistake me for my mother as a young girl, which was both painful and illuminating. "Diane, why are you always so angry?" she asked me once. "You were such a happy child before your father left." This glimpse into my mother's past gave me the first inkling that her cruelty might stem from her own unhealed wounds. But understanding the source of her behavior didn't excuse it, and it didn't make me any more willing to remain its target. Books became not just an escape, but a resource. I gravitated toward stories of survival and independence, fiction and nonfiction accounts of people who overcame difficult circumstances. The school library became my university of self-reliance. I read about finances, scholarships, emancipation laws, and survival skills, all under the guise of various school projects. Throughout middle school, I maintained perfect grades, knowing that academic achievement would be my ticket out. I joined every free extracurricular activity that might strengthen my college applications: debate club, school, newspaper, math team. My parents, ironically, were proud of these accomplishments, not realizing they were funding my eventual escape with every academic award I earned. As I grew older and taller, my parents' pranks became less physical and more psychological. They no longer hid my belongings or left me places, but their emotional manipulation intensified. They would give me the silent treatment for days without explanation, spread rumors about me to relatives, or invite everyone but me to family events. The wounds were less visible, but no less painful. In high school, I began working part-time jobs, first babysitting, then as a library aide, and finally at a local bookstore. Every dollar I earned was carefully split a portion, went into the bank account my parents had access to for show, and the rest went into a secret cash reserve hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre, another story of a girl who escaped a toxic household. Junior year, I began researching colleges focusing exclusively on schools far from Illinois. I requested information be sent to Lizzie's address rather than my own, and used school computers for all my applications. I applied for every scholarship available, wrote countless essays, and secured glowing recommendations from teachers who saw my potential. My guidance counselor, Mr. Patel, was particularly helpful, though I never revealed to him the true urgency behind my desire to leave home. When the acceptance letter from the University of Washington arrived at Lizzie's house, along with a full academic scholarship, I felt the first real hope I'd had in years. Seattle, nearly 2,000 miles from Chicago, would be my new beginning. I made arrangements for student housing, carefully filled out all the necessary paperwork, and began mentally preparing for my departure. My grandmother Martha passed away during my senior year of high school. Her funeral was the last time I saw many of my extended family members. As I stood by her casket, I silently thanked her for showing me that love didn't have to hurt, that family could be gentle. With her gone, the last thread connecting me to my family was severed. Graduation day was a masterclass in performance. I smiled for photos, accepted congratulations, and played the part of the proud daughter. My parents threw a lavish party, inviting neighbors and colleagues to witness their successful parenting, never suspecting that in a matter of weeks, I would disappear from their lives. The night before my departure, I packed methodically while my parents slept. One suitcase of carefully chosen clothes, my important documents, the cash I'd saved over years, a few precious books, and a single photograph of my grandmother. Everything else I left behind. It was all replaceable, and none of it held good memories. I slipped out before dawn, leaving only a brief note on the kitchen counter. "I'm finding my way home." They would understand the reference to the train station, would know exactly why I was gone. I took a cab to the airport and boarded a plane to Seattle, my heart racing with terror and exhilaration. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the shrinking city below and realized I was finally free. Seattle greeted me with rain and the intoxicating scent of possibility. Standing outside SeaTac Airport with my single suitcase, I felt both terrifying freedom and crushing fear. For the first time in my life, there was no one telling me what to do, where to go, or who to be, and no one trying to hurt me for their amusement. The realization brought tears to my eyes that blended with the gentle drizzle. My first apartment was a tiny studio in the University District found through a student housing bulletin board. The space was barely larger than my bedroom at home, with a kitchenette consisting of a mini fridge, a 2-burner stove, and a sink that dripped continuously. But it was mine, a safe space where no one could enter without my permission, where I could exist without walking on eggshells. I furnished it with secondhand finds from thrift stores and student move-out days. A futon that served as both couch and bed, a wobbly desk and chair, a floor lamp with a crooked shade. My prized possession was a small bookshelf. I assembled myself, filling it with books purchased for pennies at library sales. Each item represented a choice I had made independently, a tiny victory in building a life of my own. College classes provided structure and purpose. I approached my education with the same determination that had fueled my escape, often studying late into the night at the library, to avoid returning to my empty apartment. My academic success continued, but I struggled with the social aspects of college life. Years of isolation and mistrust had left me with few social skills and a deep-seated fear of getting close to people. This changed somewhat when I was assigned a roommate for a group project in my freshman communications class. Sophia Chen was everything I wasn't, outgoing, confident from a large, loving family in San Francisco. At first, I kept her at arm's length, responding to her friendly overtures with polite but distant replies. But Sophia was persistent, inviting me for coffee, sharing her mother's homemade dumplings, asking thoughtful questions without pushing when I deflected. Slowly, I began to see through Sophia what a healthy friendship could look like. She respected my boundaries, but gently encouraged me to stretch beyond my comfort zone. She never made fun of my insecurities or used my vulnerabilities against me. When I finally shared a sanitized version of my background, she listened without judgment, then simply said, "Their loss. You're amazing." Trust came harder with others. I would begin to form connections, then back away, when people got too close, inventing excuses to avoid deeper intimacy. I sabotaged potential friendships out of fear, convinced that eventually everyone would reveal themselves to be cruel or manipulative. During my sophomore year, a persistent academic advisor finally convinced me to visit the Student Counseling Center. My first therapy session with Dr. Reyes was uncomfortable and stilted. I answered her questions with minimal detail, unwilling to expose my wounds to a stranger. At the end of the session, she said something that stayed with me. "Katherine, you don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. But I want you to consider that the walls you've built to keep pain out are also keeping healing out." It took 3 more sessions before I could bring myself to describe the train station incident. When I finally did, the words came in a rush, years of pent-up emotions spilling out. Dr. Reyes listened attentively, then said quietly, "That wasn't a joke, Katherine. That was abandonment. What your parents did throughout your childhood wasn't normal or acceptable." Hearing someone in authority validate what I had always known but had been conditioned to doubt was like having a weight lifted from my chest. I continued therapy throughout college, slowly unpacking the layers of trauma and learning to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy relationships. Professor Adams, my American literature professor, became another important figure in my healing journey. A kind grandfatherly man with wire-rimmed glasses and elbow patches on his tweed jackets. He took an interest in my insightful papers and encouraged me to speak up more in class discussions. He never knew the details of my background, but he seemed to sense my need for gentle guidance. His office door was always open, and our conversations about literature often veered into discussions about life resilience and finding meaning in difficult experiences. My part-time job at the campus library provided both income and comfort. Surrounded by books, working in quiet, organized spaces with clear expectations and routines, I found peace in the predictability. My supervisor, Marion, praised my reliability and attention to detail, offering the kind of constructive feedback and positive reinforcement I had never received at home. Romance was a territory I avoided entirely until my junior year when David entered my life. We met in a creative writing elective. He was a computer science major who loved science fiction and had a quiet, thoughtful demeanor that didn't trigger my alarm bells. Our relationship developed slowly, beginning as study partners, evolving into friendship, and gradually becoming something more. When David first took my hand during a walk through campus, I flinched instinctively. He immediately let go, apologizing. "No, I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed by my reaction. "It's not you. It's just, I'm not used to being touched in kind ways." The look of concern and understanding on his face nearly undid me. "We can go as slow as you need," he said simply. And he meant it, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, respecting every boundary I set, and celebrating each small step toward intimacy as a victory rather than an expectation. Through David, I began to learn the basic life skills my parents had never taught me: how to cook simple meals, how to change a tire, how to manage a budget beyond mere survival. More importantly, I learned that love didn't have to hurt, that disagreements didn't have to end in cruelty, that vulnerability could be met with tenderness rather than exploitation. Throughout these years of growth, my parents made sporadic attempts to contact me. There were voicemails I deleted without listening to letters. I returned unopened emails that went straight to trash. The thought of hearing their voices or reading their words would trigger panic attacks that left me gasping for breath, curled in a ball on my bathroom floor with Dr. Reyes's help. I came to understand that this was my body's way of protecting me, and that I didn't owe my abusers any access to my new life. When my brother Michael's wedding invitation arrived during my senior year, I experienced my first serious moment of wavering. Michael had been just 9 years old during the train station incident, a child himself unable to stop our parents' behavior. We had never been close, the golden child and the scapegoat naturally separated by our parents' differential treatment, but he wasn't directly responsible for my pain. After days of agonizing and several emergency therapy sessions, I decided not to attend. I sent a gift and a brief note congratulating him, but explained that I wasn't ready for a family reunion. The decision brought both relief and grief. Relief at maintaining the boundaries that kept me safe, grief at the connections that abuse had stolen from me. I graduated with honors, walking across the stage to receive my diploma with no family in the audience. In their place was a small but meaningful group of supporters: Sophia and her parents, who had adopted me into their family traditions, Professor Adams beaming proudly, Marion from the library, and David cheering loudly as my name was called. I had found my people, created my own version of family, based on mutual respect and genuine care. My first professional job came through a connection from Professor Adams, an entry-level position at a small publishing house in downtown Seattle. The work was challenging and fulfilling, allowing me to combine my love of literature with my organizational skills. For the first time, I was earning enough to move beyond mere survival mode. I found an apartment in a converted Victorian home in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Still small, but with character and charm. A bay window with a window seat became my reading nook, and I splurged on a real bed with a headboard, retiring the futon to its intended purpose as a couch. Each piece of furniture, each decorative touch was chosen with care, creating a sanctuary that reflected my emerging sense of self. The past still surfaced occasionally in unexpected ways. During my first year at the publishing house, a coworker thought it would be funny to hide under my desk and grab my ankles when I returned from lunch. His harmless prank triggered a full-blown panic attack that left me hyperventilating in the supply closet. My supervisor, concerned rather than judgmental, suggested I might have PTSD and gently recommended the company's employee assistance program for additional therapy. Through continued work with a trauma specialist, I began to recognize my responses for what they were: normal reactions to abnormal experiences. The freezing, when someone raised their voice, the flinching at sudden movements, the constant vigilance. These weren't character flaws, but adaptive mechanisms that had helped me survive. Understanding this was the first step toward healing, toward reclaiming the parts of myself that fear had locked away. 5 years after leaving home, I had established myself in Seattle. My position at the publishing house had evolved from assistant to junior editor. I had a small circle of trusted friends, and my relationship with David had deepened into a comfortable partnership. I had created a life that, while not perfect, was stable and generally happy. The past remained where I believed it belonged, behind me, acknowledged, but not controlling my present. That careful separation shattered on a rainy Tuesday in April, when I looked up from my desk to see my brother Michael standing in the doorway of the publishing house. My first reaction was physical: a cold sweat racing, heart tunnel vision. Fight or flight activated instantly, though I remained frozen in my chair. My second reaction was anger. How dare he invade the safe space I had created, the life I had built without them? How had he even found me? Michael had changed in the 7 years since I'd last seen him. No longer a teenager, He was a tall, broad-shouldered man of 25, dressed in a business casual attire that suggested professional success. But I could still see traces of the boy I'd grown up with in his uncertain smile and the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Katherine," he said simply, "can we talk?" I felt my colleague's curious eyes on us as I led Michael out of the office and to a cafe down the street. We sat at a corner table, steam rising from untouched coffee cups between us. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I finally broke it. "How did you find me?" Michael looked down. "It wasn't that hard. You've been published in literary journals. Your name is on the publishing house website." I felt a flash of annoyance at my own carelessness. Of course, in building my career, I had made myself findable. "What do you want, Michael?" "To see you, to talk, to understand." He hesitated. "I've spent years trying to understand why you left and never came back." I laughed bitterly. "You know exactly why I left." Michael's expression was pained. "The train station. I know about that. Mom and Dad told their version, but I knew there was more to it." Their version. Let me guess. I overreacted to a harmless prank. I was too sensitive. I misunderstood their intentions. The familiar defenses rose in my throat. "At first, yes, that's what they said." Michael took a deep breath. "But I was 9, Katherine. I remember more than they think I do. I remember how they treated you compared to me. I remember hearing you cry at night. I remember feeling relieved when it was you they were focusing on instead of me, and then feeling guilty for being relieved." His honesty caught me off guard. "You never said anything. You never tried to help." "I was a kid. I was scared. And by the time I was old enough to really understand what had happened, you were gone." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I'm not making excuses. I just want you to know that I see it now. I understand why you left and I don't blame you." We talked for hours in that cafe, the afternoon light fading to evening around us. Michael shared his perspective on our childhood, how he had benefited from being the golden child, but had also been damaged by the dysfunctional dynamic. How he had struggled with guilt over his preferential treatment. How as an adult he had begun to recognize the toxicity of our parents' behavior. He told me about our father's health problems, high blood pressure, a minor heart attack the previous year. About our mother's increasing bitterness as her beauty faded and her social circle shrank. About their gradual realization over years of my absence that I wasn't coming back, that their joke had permanent consequences. "They've changed," Michael said tentatively. "Not completely, not perfectly, but they've had to face some hard truths. Dad's health scare especially made him think about his legacy, about the relationships he's damaged." I remained skeptical. "People like them don't change, Michael. They just find new ways to manipulate." "Maybe, maybe not." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "This is the family therapist I've been seeing for the past 2 years. She's helped me understand a lot about our family dynamics, about breaking cycles." I took the card reflexively, but made no promise to use it. "They ask about you," Michael continued. "Not in a demanding way, not anymore. They just wonder if you're okay, if you're happy." "And what do you tell them?" "That I don't know, that they'll have to live with that uncertainty as a consequence of their actions." He looked at me directly. "I'm not here as their messenger, Katherine. I'm here for me and for you. Whatever relationship you decide to have or not have with them is your choice. I just want a chance to know my sister again." Before he left, Michael made one request. "Think about coming home for Christmas. Not to the house if that's too much. We could meet at a neutral location with the therapist present if you want. Just a conversation, that's all I'm asking." I promised to think about it, but made no commitments. As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The anger and fear were still there, but also a flicker of something like hope, not for reconciliation with my parents, but for the possibility of a relationship with my brother, who seemed to have done his own growing up. The weeks following Michael's visit were emotionally turbulent. I had nightmares about the train station again, waking in a cold sweat, convinced I had been abandoned. I snapped at David over minor irritations, then dissolved into tears, unable to explain the storm of feelings his simple question about dinner plans had triggered. I missed deadlines at work staring blankly at manuscripts without processing the words. In sessions with Dr. Chen, who had replaced Dr. Reyes when I transitioned from student counseling to private therapy, I grappled with questions of forgiveness, reconciliation, and boundary setting. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, Dr. Chen reminded me gently. You can forgive someone, release the emotional hold they have on you, without allowing them back into your life. But what if they really have changed? I asked. Don't people deserve second chances? People can change, she agreed. But change requires acknowledging harm done making amends and demonstrating consistent new behavior over time. Has any of that happened here? The answer was no. While Michael's visit had provided new perspective, my parents had made no direct attempt to acknowledge their abuse or make amends. Any changes Michael perceived might be real, but they weren't enough to risk my hard-won safety and peace. After much reflection, I decided to write a letter instead of visiting for Christmas. I spent days drafting and redrafting, trying to find the right balance between honesty and protection. The final version was clear, but not cruel firm, but not vindictive. I explained why I had left, how their behavior had affected me, and what I needed from them now. Acknowledgement of the harm they had caused, respect for my boundaries, and time to decide if any relationship was possible in the future. Michael's response came quickly. Disappointment, but understanding. They received your letter, he wrote. Dad was quiet for a long time after reading it. Mom cried. I think it's the first time they've really had to face the consequences of their actions, without being able to rewrite the narrative. We established a tentative connection after that, Michael and I. Monthly emails at first, then occasional phone calls. I learned about his work as an architect, his marriage to a kindergarten teacher named Rachel, his efforts to understand family systems and break harmful patterns before having children of his own. 6 months after his visit, I agreed to a video call that included a brief, carefully controlled interaction with my parents. It was strange and unsettling to see them on the screen, older, grayer somehow, smaller than in my memory. My father looked frail, his once imposing presence diminished by illness. My mother's face was lined with bitterness, her smile strained and uncertain. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, none of us mentioning the elephant in the room. When my mother tentatively asked when I might visit Chicago, I replied simply, I'm not ready for that. I found my own home now. The look of resignation on their faces told me they understood the double meaning of my words. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment feeling strangely empty. Not devastated or triggered as I had feared, just empty. They held no power over me anymore, these people who had loomed so large in my nightmares. They were just two aging, flawed humans who had made terrible choices and were living with the consequences. That realization was the beginning of a new phase in my healing journey. By the time I turned 30, I had built a life that looked successful by conventional standards. I had been promoted to senior editor at the publishing house, overseeing a small team and working with authors I admired. I owned a modest but charming condo with the bay window I loved and shelves full of carefully chosen books. I had a small circle of close friends who knew enough about my past to understand my occasional odd reactions, but who valued me for the person I had become despite those challenges. But beneath this veneer of success, I still struggled with deeper connections. David and I had ended our relationship after 4 years together, amicably, but with the mutual acknowledgement that I couldn't fully open myself to the intimacy he wanted and deserved. Other relationships followed a similar pattern. Initial connection growing closeness, then retreat, when vulnerability became too frightening. Then James entered my life, a new author whose historical novel I was editing. Our professional relationship was contentious at first. He pushed back against my editorial suggestions, and I insisted on changes I believed would strengthen his work. Our email exchanges were spirited, challenging, occasionally frustrating, but always intellectually stimulating. When the manuscript was finally completed, he asked me to dinner to celebrate. I agreed, expecting a brief professional meal. Instead, we talked for hours, discovering shared passions for history travel and obscure independent films. James was different from other men I had dated, more direct, less willing to accept my careful deflections when conversations veered toward personal matters. "You're very good at answering questions without revealing anything about yourself," he observed during our third dinner together. "I'd like to know the real Catherine, not just the skilled editor." His perceptiveness was both alarming and refreshing. Slowly, cautiously, I began to let him see beyond my professional facade. I shared carefully edited versions of my past, at first gauging his reactions, testing whether he would use this information against me as my parents had. Our relationship developed gradually over 6 months of weekly dinners, museum visits, and long walks along Seattle's waterfront. James never pushed for physical intimacy, seeming to intuit my need for a slower pace. When he finally kissed me goodnight after a concert, it felt like a natural progression rather than a demand. 3 months into our relationship, James suggested a surprise weekend trip. "Pack a bag for 2 days," he said with a mysterious smile. "I'll pick you up Friday after work." The word surprise triggered an immediate panic response. My heart raced, my vision narrowed, and I felt the familiar dissociative floating sensation that preceded a full panic attack. "I can't," I gasped, backing away from him. "No surprises. I need to know where we're going. I need to be in control." Confusion and concern replaced James's smile. "Of course," he said quickly. "It's just a cabin on Whidbey Island. Nothing elaborate. I thought it would be romantic, but we don't have to go at all." I fled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face and using the grounding techniques Dr. Chen had taught me. When I emerged, James was sitting patiently on my couch, worry evident in his expression. "I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed by my reaction. "I have issues with surprises." "I can see that," he replied gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" For the first time, I felt ready to share the whole truth with someone outside the safety of a therapist's office. "It's a long story," I warned. "I have time," James said, simply making space for me beside him on the couch. I told him everything that night, about the years of pranks and emotional abuse, about the train station abandonment, about my escape, and the years of rebuilding that followed. I spoke without censoring, without minimizing, allowing myself to be completely vulnerable, in a way I never had before. When I finished, James was quiet for a long moment. I braced myself for the pitying look I dreaded, for well-intentioned but unhelpful platitudes about how strong I was, how I was better off without my family. Instead, he said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story." Then, with genuine anger in his voice, "What your parents did wasn't a joke. It was cruel and deliberate. I'm sorry you experienced that, and I'm in awe of how you've built your life despite it." His response wasn't pity, but solidarity, recognition of both the pain and the strength in my journey. We talked late into the night about trauma responses, about boundaries, about what I needed to feel safe in our relationship. James listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, committing to memory the specific triggers I identified. The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship and in my healing journey. For the first time, I had shared my full, unedited truth with a romantic partner and had been met with understanding rather than withdrawal. The vulnerability I had feared for so long turned out to be the gateway to a deeper connection. In my next session with Dr. Chen, I had another breakthrough. "I've been defining myself by what happened to me," I realized aloud. "Everything in my life, where I live, how I work, who I let close, has been a reaction to the train station. I've been running away for so long that I forgot to think about what I'm running toward." Dr. Chen smiled. "That's an important insight, Katherine. So what are you running toward now?" The question stayed with me for days. What did I want my life to be about beyond survival and safety? Who was I beyond the wounded child, the abandoned girl at the train station? I began exploring these questions through group therapy with other adult survivors of childhood emotional abuse. In those sessions, I found both solidarity and inspiration. People who understood my experiences, but were at different stages of their healing journeys, some further along, offering hope for what might be possible. Through one of these group members, I connected with Jake, the security guard, who had helped me at Union Station all those years ago. Now retired, he remembered me vividly. "I reported your parents, you know," he told me during our phone conversation. "Called DCFS that same day. But without visible bruises or marks, and with your parents' charm offensive, nothing came of it. I've thought about you often over the years, wondered if you were okay." His concern extending across nearly 2 decades moved me deeply. Here was someone who had seen me at my most vulnerable and had tried to help even when his professional obligations had been fulfilled. His small act of kindness had been a lifeline in a dark moment, proof that not all adults would hurt me. Inspired by Jake's example and my own healing process, I began volunteering with a program that provided support to children in foster care. Every Saturday, I helped run a creative writing workshop where kids could express their experiences through poetry and stories. Their resilience and creativity in the face of difficult circumstances reminded me of my own childhood strategies for survival and helped me reframe my past as a source of wisdom rather than just pain. As my relationship with James deepened, I faced another challenge: learning to share space and vulnerability on a daily basis. After a year of dating, he asked if I would consider moving in together. My initial reaction was fear. Fear of losing my safe space, fear of being trapped, fear of revealing the small daily habits and quirks that might make him stop loving me. "We don't have to decide right away," James assured me. "And we could keep your condo for a while if you need a place that's just yours. I want to build a life with you, Katherine, at whatever pace works for us." His patience and understanding gave me the courage to take this next step. We found an apartment with enough space for both of us to have private areas, and I kept my condo as a safety net for the first 6 months, gradually spending more time in our shared home as my comfort grew. Living together revealed new layers of my trauma responses: the way I apologized constantly for minor things, how I tried to make myself smaller, and less demanding my tendency to hoard food in secret places. James responded to these discoveries with compassion, rather than judgment, helping me recognize these patterns without shame. On my 32nd birthday, I received an unexpected letter from my mother. Unlike my father's occasional brief emails, always superficial, never acknowledging the past, this was a handwritten multi-page letter on expensive stationery. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what fresh pain might be contained inside. "Katherine," it began, "I know I have no right to expect you to read this, much less respond to it. But as I approach my 60th birthday, I find myself reflecting on my life and the many mistakes I've made. Chief among them is the way I treated you." The letter continued with what seemed like genuine reflection on her behavior, acknowledging specific incidents, including the train station abandonment. "There is no excuse for what we did to you," she wrote. "We called them jokes, but they were cruelty, plain and simple. I won't insult you by claiming I didn't know better. I did. I chose to hurt my child because it gave me some twisted sense of power in a life where I felt powerless in many ways." She didn't ask for forgiveness or for me to return home. She simply closed with, "You deserved better parents than we were. I hope you have built a life filled with the love and security we failed to provide. If there is ever anything I can do to make amends, I am here. If not, I understand completely." I didn't respond to the letter, but I kept it. It wasn't an immediate healing balm, but it was the first real acknowledgement from either of my parents that what they had done was wrong. The fact that it came without demands or expectations made it feel more genuine than any previous communication. A month later, James proposed. We were hiking in the Olympic National Forest, having stopped at a vista overlooking the mountains and distant ocean. As he knelt on the forest path, ringbox in hand, I felt a moment of panic, not because I didn't want to marry him, but because marriage represented the ultimate vulnerability, the final surrender of the walls I had built so carefully. "Katherine Elizabeth Harper," he said, using my full name with reverence. "You are the most courageous, resilient, and loving person I've ever known. Every day with you is a gift. Will you marry me and continue building our life together?" I hesitated only briefly before saying yes. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned that vulnerability, while risky, was also the only path to true connection. And connection I had finally accepted was worth the risk. The wedding planning process brought up unexpected questions about family. Who would walk me down the aisle, whether to invite my parents and brother, how to explain their absence to James's large, close-knit family. After much thought and discussion with both James and Dr. Chen, I decided to invite only Michael and his wife to represent my family of origin. Your family is who you choose it to be, James reminded me. The people who have supported you, who have earned a place in your life, that's who should be there on our wedding day. And so our wedding was filled with my chosen family. Sophia, who had flown in from San Francisco with her parents. Professor Adams, who had retired but still mentored young writers, colleagues from the publishing house, who had become friends, members of my support group, who understood the significance of this step. And Jake, who had traveled from Chicago to see the frightened girl he had once helped now stepping confidently into a new chapter of her life. As I walked alone down the aisle, I realized I wasn't really alone at all. I was surrounded by people who knew me, truly knew me, my struggles and strengths alike, and loved me not despite, but because of the journey that had made me who I was. 2 years into our marriage, James and I bought a house, a craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch, a garden bursting with flowers planted by the previous owner, and enough room for the family we hoped to create. Moving in, arranging our books on built-in shelves, choosing paint colors together, I was struck by how far I had come from the frightened girl at the train station, from the young woman who had fled to Seattle with a single suitcase. When I discovered I was pregnant a few months later, my joy was tempered by new anxieties. Would I know how to be a good mother when I had no positive model to follow? Would the patterns of my childhood somehow seep into my parenting despite my best intentions? Chen helped me work through these fears, reminding me that awareness was the first step in breaking generational cycles. You've spent years understanding the impact of your parents' behavior, she pointed out. That knowledge, combined with your commitment to doing better, already puts you light years ahead. James and I attended parenting classes together, read books on child development, and had long conversations about our values and hopes for our child. We created deliberate family traditions based on kindness, respect, and joy. Pancake Sundays, bedtime stories every night, no matter how busy the day had been. Celebrations of small achievements as well as major milestones. During my pregnancy, I channeled my reflections on childhood and healing into a children's book manuscript, the story of a young girl who gets separated from her parents in a busy city and is helped by a series of kind strangers until she finds her way to a home where she truly belongs. The story was therapeutic to write, transforming my traumatic experience into something that might help other children feel less alone in their struggles. To my surprise, the manuscript was accepted by a small but respected children's book publisher. Seeing my words paired with gentle illustrations, holding the finished book in my hands, I felt a sense of closure that no confrontation with my parents could have provided. I had taken the darkest chapter of my story and transmuted it into something that might bring comfort to others. A month before my due date, I received a call from Michael. Our father was in the hospital diagnosed with terminal cancer. "He's asking to see you," Michael said quietly. I told him I would pass along the message, but that the decision was entirely yours. The request plunged me back into turmoil. Part of me wanted to refuse outright. Why should I offer comfort to someone who had caused me so much pain? But another part wondered if seeing him speaking my truth directly to him one final time might provide a different kind of closure. After days of deliberation and long talks with both James and Dr. Chen, I decided to make the trip to Chicago. James came with me for support, as did Dr. Chen, who arranged to join us as a professional presence during the hospital visit. Their presence gave me the courage to face what awaited me. The man in the hospital bed barely resembled the father of my memories. Cancer had ravaged his once robust frame, leaving him gaunt and gray. His eyes, however, still held a flicker of recognition when I entered the room. "Katherine," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "You came." My mother sat beside his bed, her own face lined and tired. She stood when she saw me uncertainty in her expression. "I'll give you some time alone with your father," she said, moving toward the door. "No," I replied firmly. "Anything he has to say to me, he can say with you present. You were both there at the train station." She flinched at the reference, but nodded, resuming her seat. I had prepared a speech, carefully crafted words about forgiveness and moving on, but facing them in that sterile hospital room, all my rehearsed phrases evaporated. Instead, I spoke from the heart. "I'm not here to make peace, or to pretend the past didn't happen." I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm here because I don't want to live with the regret of not saying what needs to be said. What you did to me throughout my childhood, and especially that day at the train station, was abuse. Not jokes, not tough love, not parenting. Abuse." My father closed his eyes briefly, tears seeping from beneath his lids. "I know," he whispered. "I've known for a long time, but I was too proud, too stubborn to admit it. When you left and never came back, it forced me to face what we had done." My mother's reaction was different. "We made mistakes," she said defensively. "All parents do. But we provided for you, gave you opportunities." "Mom," Michael interjected sharply from the corner where he stood with James. "Not now. Not like this." I turned to my mother, the calm certainty I felt surprising me. "You can choose to acknowledge the harm you caused or not. That's your journey. I'm not here seeking your admission or apology. I've built a good life without you in it. I'm here for me to say what I needed to say, and now I have." To my father I added, "I forgive you, not for your sake but for mine. Carrying anger and pain has been too heavy a burden, but forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't erase the past or guarantee a future relationship." He nodded weakly. "I understand. Thank you for coming, for letting me see you one last time. You turned out strong, Katherine, stronger than either of us ever was." As we prepared to leave, my mother followed me into the hallway. "Will you come back? After he's gone?" she asked. "No," I said gently but firmly. "This visit isn't the beginning of a renewed relationship. My life is in Seattle now, with the family I've chosen, and the one I'm creating." I placed a hand on my rounded belly. "Your grandchild will know of you, but not in the way you might hope. I'll tell them the truth, but with compassion, not bitterness." The hurt in her eyes was real, but so was the understanding. She had lost the right to be part of my life long ago, and we both knew it. My father passed away a month later. I didn't attend the funeral, sending flowers instead, with a simple card, "Rest in peace." It was the most genuine sentiment I could offer. 2 weeks after that, our daughter was born. Lily Ruth Harper Collins, named partially after the kind stranger who had helped me at Union Station so many years ago. Holding her in my arms, I made a silent promise. You will always know where home is. It will never be a place you're afraid to return to. It will always be where you are loved unconditionally. As Lily grew, I watched for any signs that I was repeating patterns from my own childhood. When I caught myself being impatient or using a harsh tone, I would pause, breathe, and choose a different approach. I wasn't a perfect parent. No one is. But I was a conscious one, aware of the legacy I wanted to leave. Michael and his wife visited when Lily was 6 months old, bringing their own newborn son. Watching our children play together on a blanket in our living room, I felt a bittersweet sense of reclamation. The siblings who had been set against each other by toxic parenting were now creating a new generation of cousins who would know only love and support from their parents. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been?" Michael asked as we sat on the porch swing, watching James and Rachel push strollers around the garden. If Mom and Dad had been different, if we had grown up in a healthy home, I considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But then I might not have become who I am today. I might not have found my way to Seattle, to publishing, to James. I might not have Lily. I smiled at my daughter's laughter floating across the yard. I wouldn't change where I am now, even if it meant erasing the painful path that led here. The journey from that terrified 12-year-old at Union Station to the woman I am today has been long and often difficult. There have been setbacks, moments of doubt, old fears resurfacing in new contexts. But there has also been joy connection and a deep sense of triumph in creating the life and family I never had as a child. Family, I've learned, is not defined by blood or obligation. It's built through choice, respect, and consistent love. Home is not the place you come from, but the place or people where you can be fully yourself, vulnerabilities and all, and know that you are safe. That day at the train station when my parents laughingly said, "Let's see how she finds her way home," they had no idea that their cruelty would set me on a path to discover what home truly means. It took years of searching, healing, and growth, but I finally found it. Not in returning to a place that had never really held love for me, but in creating my own sanctuary, where love is never used as a weapon, and where no one is ever left behind as a joke. Have you had to create your own definition of home? Share your journey in the comments. If my story touched you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to find your own way home. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve a family that would never leave you behind.